Hey, now welcome to the show, where the wind's blowing strong and the truth can flow. This is the good oil, catch a vibe today, with Cam Slater leading us all the way from the heart of the land.
Welcome to episode 20 of the Good Oil podcast. Jillaine, Heather.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now you're the head, I guess, head spokesperson, the head honcho at the Free Speech Union. But before we get into talking about that and free speech and everything else that goes with that, why don't you give us a bit of a background for the listeners and watchers of the videos that we put out, just to show them what your background is.
Sure. And once again, look, thanks for having me on. It's an interesting experience, literally my first podcast, so we'll see how this goes. Born in New Zealand, sort of went to school here, trained in one thing as a lawyer, actually, back when technology was a little bit new to everything, and then, like everyone else in New Zealand, went overseas, went to London a little bit later in life than others, but went to London for a couple of years and then sort of stayed overseas for nearly 20 years.
Wow.
Sort of did London, did a year in Melbourne, ended up in New York for sort of nearly 7 years, Mexico, and then Kuwait for a bit. But I'd been meaning to come back to New Zealand for ages. My husband and I, we had a daughter overseas and really wanted to make sure that New Zealand was her home, country versus being...
You would have seen quite a few changes in 20 years away.
Well, so we were back every couple of years for Christmas, but I think that was it. I think once we came back, which was sort of through COVID, but coming back to New Zealand, it really did seem like a different community and society from that I'd left. Like, it was 20 years, so that's expected. So that was quite interesting, I sort of thought, and definitely leads into that whole free speech journey, just in terms of noticing that felt like there were eggshells everywhere. We couldn't talk about stuff. There were topics that just sort of weren't raised in polite conversation or anywhere. And it did feel like the media sort of landscape was a little different. I had spent quite a bit of time in the States or in Mexico, so I was quite immersed in sort of the polarized identitarian politics and media a little bit. And I was really surprised that coming back, it felt like we'd sort of imported a lot of that lock, stock and barrel here.
And it's funny, the people who decry the importation of foreign culture or, things like from the United States, culture wars and stuff, the ones who scream the loudest are the ones who actually enforce the same things, because they think there's nothing wrong with bringing in their identitarian bullshit, I call it, but bringing that in and then policing it vigorously to make sure that you can't say anything, you can't stand up to the trans nonsense, you can't, I don't care what somebody thinks they are, but they can't require me to entertain their delusion. And that's my position on that, and I'll fight loud and strong to maintain that position. I'm not going to be silenced, but there's been a lot of polarisation in New Zealand in the last 20 years. It's been huge.
I think that's entirely right. And, when I came back every 2 years for Christmas, I never really picked up on it. I wasn't really obviously following what was going on that closely. And so coming back after 20 years, I was really surprised that kind of lock, stock and barrel, everything toxic or polarising that I'd seen in the States up close was here writ large. And we couldn't even have the conversations.
No, you're not allowed to. You weren't allowed to. If some bloke with a beard says that he's a girl and his pronouns are whatever he comes up with, you're supposed to accept that instead of, just saying, hang on, you're weird.
Exactly, or at least even having a discussion and identifying, is there a rights conflict? Do we have different ideas? What is going on here? How can we even address this in a community or in society? But we weren't allowed to have that conversation, and I found that very different to what it was. When I left, I sort of felt like you could still have a stand-up Barney with someone, and then you'd have a meal or go to the pub, or you'd agree to disagree, as...
I've got a few lefty friends, and Chris Trotter's one of them, and we might not agree on maybe, vehemently disagree on 10% of things. There might be 10% where either one of us could be convinced of the merits of an argument, and 80% of the stuff we agree on. But it's that little margin of 10% that became almost forbidden to talk about, whatever the topic is, whether it's what your views are on the treaty or race relations or trans issues or there's this sort of like almost fringe issues really. And there was this agreed narrative that no one knew what it was except the media knew what it was. And if you spoke ill of the agreed narrative, then you got othered or you got cancelled or you got... And it went down to political views as well. In 2014, I was cancelled. There was a book written about me. All the things that are in the book are all the things that happen in politics on all sides of it, but this was written that we don't agree with your politics, so you must be silenced.
And that's exactly what I picked up on when I came back. And as you say, I think disagreeing with someone is the most interesting time, trying to figure out where do we disagree, why, what's driving you, how can we figure this out or not? And sometimes you can't, but at least understanding that. But we couldn't, you're right, we couldn't even enter into the conversation with it. And
it got progressively worse. I think Helen Clark kicked a lot of it off. She really polarised New Zealand politics. She always talked about National Party supporters as Tories. People in the Labour Party still do that. It's putting a foreign nickname onto a Conservative party that doesn't really fit in New Zealand society, especially if you look at where we've been through World War One, World War Two, all those conflicts, how New Zealand society was really an egalitarian society where Jack was as good as your master. And then all of a sudden we had this elitist viewpoint that there was approved things that you could talk about. There was approved positions that you had to have, and if you had something that was completely different to that or whatever, all of a sudden you're persecuted for it. And, I can remember John Key being persecuted for saying that, he supported the rugby tour, the Springbok tour, when he would have been a kid. People change over time.
Yep.
But they go back through all your history and they try and hang you for something that happened 30 years ago. It's just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, and it's so it's so backwards about trying to find any common ground, right? You need to give someone the grace and generosity to grow and to change. If you don't change your ideas from when you're 20 to when you're 40, you're
probably stupid.
Yeah, or near dead, or just completely unaware or very uninteresting at the very least. And so that gotcha moment where you thought about this then. And, now you're trying to do something different.
I get it all the time on X. People go, is this you? And post something from, 2014. It was 11 years ago. Grow up.
Yeah.
And it's all just designed to smear and slur. And I should know, I did a fair bit of it in my time, but I've changed. And I think that's what's lacking in New Zealand politics. And if you look at, the National Party and the Labour Party, for example, you could throw a cloth over the policy agreements, right? The policy disagreements are usually about how much or how, right? But not the same. They're both wanting the same outcome, and so they're arguing over how much or how, and it's ridiculous.
Yep.
And again, it comes down to slurs. I know you do that because you hate Maori, or you do that, and you see this all the time, particularly from the Maori Party. They're probably the worst offenders, and the Greens are second worst offenders. It's
so reductive, and it's so not a way to actually engage people or try and figure out the best way forward. The name calling, it really is sort of schoolyard and in that way. And so again, I was surprised that it had happened here. I was in the cohort that voted MMP in, and one of those reasons was exactly that. Like, we're actually 80% of the time, the parties are doing the same thing with a different name, and as you say, it's around the implementation.
How or how much?
Yeah, exactly. How or how much. And so we weren't that divisive society. We wouldn't end up, in theory, fractured and not being able to govern, but definitely have seen so much more of that, since I've come back over the last 20 years.
The reason I started blogging in 2005, 20 years ago, was because my father came back from the United States and he'd had a meeting with George Bush. And George Bush said, "Oh, John, you've got to get into blogging. You got bloggers, get bloggers on your side, and it's how you sidestep the media and everything." And so it got me interested in, and that's where I started. And then, but since then, I've seen that there's a lag between what we do in New Zealand and what happens in the United States, and it's about 3 to 5 years. So we still need to have that revolution of thought that has occurred in the United States since 2016 and was ongoing. It was a bit of a blip in the middle with Biden, and then you ended up with Trump again. But there's a real change towards conservatism over there. There's a real change towards the death of the media. The media held sway well, up until 2020-ish, and then people started to realise that actually, they're not our friends. And that the media have this lofty belief that they are the guardians of democracy and the sole arbiters of it, and there should be no discussion about this. But when you are operating with the system, on behalf of the system, then you've abrogated that responsibility, and you can no longer call yourself the fourth estate, in my view. What do you think about that?
Well, I would have to agree with you. And I think in the States, they also had a much larger media landscape, right? And some very strong, let's say, conservative voices and left voices as well. But coming back, I think they have abrogated their responsibility to critically question, to listen to the people, and also to reflect the issues. Like, for instance, the Hikoi and the Treaty Principles Bill, it was in the media, every other day for sort of, days and days running. But
it was one-way traffic, though.
But who actually broke it down and sort of really, like, these are the concerns from this side, these are the concerns from this side. It was just name calling as far as I knew, and sort of shut it down, and and as opposed to even trying to understand what are people's perspectives. Why do we want to know what the principles are? Why are we worried that it's only been defined by judges or not? Why did Labor bring in a bill, how often, 15 years ago, to try and define it or not? There's none of this sort of, education about it. And that was really interesting to me. When I left New Zealand, Sir Robin Cook had defined, a case which was the treaty principles are like akin to a partnership. And when I arrived back, I was like, oh, what happened in that 15 years?
The partnership was abandoned and it became one-way traffic.
Well, that now that every incorporated knitting society, I need to have a treaty obligation in it. Yeah. And I was just honestly confused.
Well, as a lawyer, you would have been confused by that, right?
I was confused, and I just wanted can someone just fill in those gaps for me? And it's not coming from the media. Most people don't know, and I really had to, in any discussion like that, was like a third rail, that they have in the States. Like, literally that sort of...
You're not even allowed to call it the treaty. You have to now call it te tiriti.
No, exactly. And also, I'm sure I would support a lot of, what Indigenous people want, what they're sort of looking to get, their, reclaiming their mana back, their place in society. But I am really concerned about an ethno-nationalist state. And I really do understand how we got from akin to a partnership to sort of some of the demands of co-governance. But there's no explanation in the media. It's really difficult to talk to people about this, because as soon as you raise it, you're just labelled. And I'm like, where do I find out this information?
Yeah, and if you are Maori and you raise it, like David Seymour or Winston Peters, well, you're the wrong sort of Maori, and that's where it goes from there.
Yeah.
But it was very nuanced. Like, I understood why David Seymour wanted to have a principles bill. Because there are no principles in the treaty. It's actually 3 articles. None of them are principles. There's varying different interpretations of what those mean, depending on which argument you want to accept. Frankly, one argument is completely heroic in its assumptions, in that the treaty was a partnership, and the Queen of England, the Empress of India, the ruler of the Commonwealth, Queen Victoria, the most powerful monarch there's ever been, signed away half of what? With a bunch of... There weren't even nations at that stage. They were iwi, right? And various different rohi and people signing things up. So what were they... Did Queen Victoria really say we're going to share this? It's not how the British Empire worked in 1840. They rocked up with soldiers and they either took over or came to an arrangement. We came to an arrangement, but the arrangement wasn't about co-governance, in my view.
No, that's fair. That's fair enough too. That's obviously your view, and I would probably tend to agree with some of that interpretation. But it's also about, for me, it's more about what sort of community do we want now? And I think it is important to recognise, what went before. How do we address it? And I think a lot of the things that had happened with the Waitangi Tribunal were fabulous. And I thought as a nation that we were really moving in the right direction. But now it feels like it's just fracturing apart again and becoming really divisive.
Yeah, I mean, that's Chris Trotter said to me once in an interview. He said, back in the 70s, it was the treaty's a fraud. And the treaty hasn't changed. We all know the words of the treaty. So if it was a fraud in the 70s, how is it not a fraud now that we have to all agree to whatever that heroic assumption is? It's there's not a cogent thought process that's stayed current all the way through that. The treaty was a fraud. Then we was ripped off, and now it's ours. How did we get from there to there? It's like Chinese whispers, but worse.
Yeah, and I suppose from my perspective, what we need is actually a real conversation about it. But it feels like it's off limits, right? It feels like you can't even enter into a conversation without being called names. And my concern is about the future, is about New Zealand, is about the community that we want to foster for our kids and the relations we want to have there, recognising both the Indigenous people, recognising the Māori people, but then also recognising all of the benefits of New Zealand and what works for everyone in the community that we're in, as well as Māori people.
Well, Bob Jones, bless him, one of the greatest New Zealanders who's ever lived, really. He used to call it Maori wonderfulness. And it was quite disparaging and, of course, would get ridiculed, but no one would ever sue him because you don't sue millionaires because it costs you a lot of money to do that. But we've had the media play not a role as a reporting organisation or even a referee that's impartial. We've had a media that has taken its side on Maori issues, but also on trans issues and other various different issues. And they take on this kind of scolding behaviour that if you dare say anything different, and we saw this during COVID, where we had a couple of MPs or mayors were asked for what are we going to do about vaccination? And there's weeks of news coverage about how dare these people not take the vaccine. Well, no, they're entitled to. The Bill of Rights says that you can make a choice about what medical interventions you want to take. But the media were in lockstep with the government. And I think that's where the distrust in media really started to accelerate. But that's a shame for free speech, because if the media are not upholding free speech, then who will?
It's a very good question. So we call those topics sort of the sacred cows, right?
Yeah.
The areas that we can't touch. International conflicts, COVID, climate change sometimes, tiriti, and trans and or women's rights issues. And you're right, the media does itself a disservice, does the country a disservice, and does the people that read it a disservice by not actually really digging into some of these viewpoints. And I hate being told what to think, and I really do think that there's, well, we can see it in the results, right, and the lack of trust for, is it mainstream media, the lack of trust of what's sort of coming out. People are also feeling that as well. They feel like they've only been told either one side of the story, or they've been told how to think without actually being presented any of the underlying facts or why, or what could be other contributors into this, not argument, but into this discussion area. I think they've done a poor job. I think they've been in an echo chamber. I think they're too used to telling people what to think, and I think they're being bypassed now.
They are being bypassed. People are going around them all the time. But you touched on an interesting one there about international conflicts. The most recent one, of course, being Gaza. Well, the media were completely one-sided on that, basically running Hamas talking points that bore no resemblance to facts on the ground. But that then passes on to the population who are consuming that lopsided reporting. which you end up with screaming harridans from within the Green Party and some of the Labour Party, like Duncan Webb, that are horrible anti-Semites. They're just awful. And then you start getting calls from people saying, oh, we need to censor, we need to do this, we need to stop harm. And I'm saying that I don't like anti-Semitism, I don't like racism. But if someone is a racist or an anti-Semite, I'd rather know that. I'd rather, debate the arguments over it. Where have you got that idea from? Do you know that this is the case or where that came from? And a case in point is Kim.com, right, at the moment. He's blathering on about the Protocols of Zion. Right? The Protocols of Zion is a well-known anti-Semite trope that was probably written by someone in communist Russia at the time and then promulgated around the world. It's complete bullshit, but he believes it. But at least I know now, right? I know how he thinks. And when he calls John Key the Jew, I know what he thinks. Do I want him silenced? No, I want to hear him talk. I want him to reveal himself to everyone. And that's where censorship actually goes wrong. In my view, that yes, there's awful things that people say, but I'm not sure we should stop letting them say them.
No, I agree with you. You should let people tell you what they think and who they are. And that way you know exactly what they think and who they are. And as you say, you can engage them on it or not, or you can switch them off. You don't need to listen to it as well.
Yeah, or derisively mock them,
No, absolutely, and sort of pull their arguments apart and sort of, point out the contradictions on them. But no, we can't censor that. We need really bright lines for imminent violence, sort of those direct threats, even continued harassment. And we've got those in the law. We don't want people... I absolutely do not want, nor would I trust anyone to come in and censor speech because it's disagreeable or it upsets someone or it causes harm. You need robust speech. You need offensive speech even in a society, only for the fact that you don't want to trust anyone to censor your ideas or to tell you what to think or what are the bounds of propriety. I mean, it really does go back to then almost the BSA standards of, what is it, good taste and morality.
But who sets the rules on that?
Exactly.
Right, the police commissioner?
Exactly.
Now, you put out a press release, I think, yesterday about it's really a scandal in the police where the Harmful Digital Communications Act has been used to silence a complainant, and a woman was prosecuted or went through a prosecutory process. Thankfully, it didn't complete, but it was all designed to silence complaints about untoward behaviour within senior ranks of the police. That's an appalling abuse of a law that was passed with good intent, but anybody who knew anything about these sorts of things were warning the government at the time when they passed that law that these are the unintended consequences if you go ahead with it, and now we've seen that.
And seen such an awful, egregious example of the abuse as was revealed yesterday. It's like some other laws, perhaps that have been contemplated at the moment. Really good intentions, but perhaps outweighed intentions and poor execution. With the HDCA, truth was not a defence. How can that be a good law? We've just seen it weaponised against journalists, against possible whistleblower or complainants who are wanting to bring forth allegations of sexual conduct. We've seen the mission creep or the scope creep of the law. It was intended for teenagers, bullying, online bullying, etc., to address what they thought was an imminent problem. Again, I'm not sure that it has addressed any of those cases.
No, I don't think it's addressed it at all. Teenagers regularly receiving bullying messages, whether they're videos or TikToks or Snapchats or whatever, all the time. Nothing's ever done about it. Back when I was growing up, if you said something mean to somebody and they didn't like it, they punched you. And if you were good with your fist, well, maybe you could keep saying it, but likely someone who talked smack got a smack. and that was the reality of the situation with social media. None of these people who are out there saying awful things on X have ever been punched in the face for what they've said, and that's why they keep saying it. So I don't know how you can police that. I don't know that we know a law doesn't work, right? So, and now they're talking about digital ID and age verification. Well, I just see that as part of the censorship complex.
Again, I think from what we've seen when the UK brought in their Online Safety Act, and we know that Australia is struggling with how they roll out their implementation, again, outweighted intentions, really good intentions. Is there harm for social media on under 16s? No doubt, undoubtedly. But should the government implement a ban? And if it does, can it even do it effectively without it slipping into complete digital ID for everyone, or just restricting access to social media and freedom of speech for adults? I mean, there are so many questions about the implementation.
And that's what I'm worried about, that we're heading down the same path as the UK, where praying on the street can get you in trouble if you're a Christian. You don't get in trouble if you're a Muslim praying on the streets. That's creating a two-tier situation. Flying the English flag or the Union Jack will get you police knocking on your door. A mean tweet gets the police knocking on your door. It's just a ridiculous situation, and there's awfulness that's happening in society in the UK where the police are covering it up or protecting and not doing it. And there's a real development now of a two-tier policing situation occurring in the United Kingdom as a result of these online safety and hate speech laws and things like that.
The hate speech laws in England or in the UK are ridiculous, literally up to 30 arrests a day. Although they've said now that apparently they'll stop policing some tweets, but it's a ridiculous situation. We're very lucky here in New Zealand. We saw off those hate speech laws.
No, we haven't seen them off.
Not entirely.
Rust never sleeps.
Rust never sleeps. We saw off one version of it, but you're right, it keeps popping up. It is a little bit like whack-a-mole. We've still got the hate sentencing inquiry that's coming back, or the recommendations to come back on aggravated, sort of hate offences and sentencing. We saw off or helped expose the police training on, non-hate crime incidents and the flagging in the system. Apparently they've dismantled that.
Well, they really haven't.
But when I talk to people on the ground, they say it's still happening in there. So I think that's the point, a little bit like if you don't keep protecting freedom of speech, if you take your eye off the ball, it will just disappear. So
I covered the case of a guy on X called Nobody. I don't know if you're aware of that one. It was a little bit before your time at the Free Speech Union. The police came round and raided his house because of a series of tweets that he had put out there. And they described them in Official Information Act releases and emails amongst themselves that they were lawful but awful. But they still came round, terrorised his family at dinner time.
He had the young kids.
Yeah. He had firearms as well, and they tried to confiscate his firearms and say you're not a fit and proper person. But he hadn't broken the law. He hadn't broken any law whatsoever, and yet they were persecuting him.
I do remember that, and I remember meeting him very briefly once, and it sounds like it happened in a totalitarian state, right? Not in New Zealand, where you get a knock on the door and someone says it's lawful but awful. Look, I understand they have perhaps different standards that they're looking at with firearms. The firearms license.
It's still lawful.
It's still lawful though, and I think that is moving into a dystopian state, right, where you get the knocks on the door and the police, and you see it in the UK all the time, knocking on the door and want to talk to you about a tweet you put out, or even Lucy Connolly going to jail for 30 months.
It's ridiculous.
It's outrageous.
We seem to have the police breaking the law all the time. They break their own laws that they're supposed to uphold.
Well, what we saw yesterday in the IPCA report is...
It was eye-watering, really. I mean, it shows that there is systemic and rather deep corruption within the police force. It's the only word to describe it. And I'm not sure that just these three that have been named in that report are the only ones involved. There's investigators that were involved. There's other people that... So people have been leaned on, and their silence and complicity makes them just as corrupt as those people who were actively trying to hide it. And I think it also goes back as far as Mike Bush as police commissioner, because the complainant started complaining in 2018. So it covers Mike Bush's time. Well, he's the police commissioner in Australia now.
It's the length of time and the processes, the punishment that they put this woman through.
It's just appalling. It's torture, actually.
Yeah, and not believing it. Look, and I know there are people join the police force often because they do want a better society, and I would absolutely say, and or hope that the majority of everyone serving, are serving and doing the best job that they can. But when that sort of cover up and corruption comes right to the top, and McSkimming came how close to the top job? It really does. It begs questions that all is not well.
Well, Costa was the police commissioner. He also came out. I mean, we really can't believe a word he says anymore, right? He's been involved in a serious cover-up of criminal activity by his deputy. Right, that's what he's been involved in.
Yeah.
In plain words, that's what it is.
Yep.
So, do we believe him about anything else that he ever said?
I think we need to be extremely sceptical, and I think he needs to take responsibility. Right, you can't duck these sort of allegations and these findings here. And it's also very similar. We're at the moment defending Lucy Rogers, who was a protester.
Yeah. She did nothing wrong.
She did absolutely nothing wrong. She was completely gaslit by the police and everyone that first put their statements in about how she was acting, what she was doing.
She was just standing there with a sign.
Standing there silently with a sign. And then 6 months later, when video emerged out of the blue, completely contradicting what the police's story is on this. It really shakes your faith in what's happening, right?
So that's quite a low level. You're now at superintendent level in a police district that's involved in gaslighting and covering up and all that sort of thing. There's a problem in the police, and it's actually free speech issues that have highlighted it.
Exactly, the ability to stand up, the ability to criticise, the ability to push back, right, or not being allowed to push back, it's what we find a lot at the Free Speech Union. When people finally come to us, they're broken, they're shaken, their faith, is really, really rattled because they've tried to go through the proper channels, they've been gaslit, they've been, persecuted, they've been, either just fobbed off, not listened to, type thing. And it's worrying what we are uncovering and the people that we're needing to support. But as I say, honestly, I do think 90% of the people serving want to do it to better the community, to actually help, society to do their job. But you're right, there are too many instances of it popping up right at the top and at the bottom.
And, linking with that is the recent tour you've just organised and fostered throughout New Zealand of Helen Joyce. Mm-hmm. Tell us a bit about that tour, and then we'll get on to what the media reaction to it was.
Sure. So we had Helen Joyce over, touring from literally last Monday through to Saturday, through an events in Auckland, Hamilton, Palmerston North, Wellington, and then Christchurch, and part of the tour, was obviously bringing her over and having her speak, but it lined up with the Ia Tangata report, the Law Commission's report on additions to the Human Rights Act, sort of putting in gender identity and gender expression, adding it as protected characteristics in the Act, and what we believe are really enormous encroachments on people's ability to speak about sex and gender in workplaces, in healthcare and in schools. We think that the Law Commission's recommendations as they stand will really shut down free speech even more than is already shut down in those places. And we already know that people are feeling the chill. They don't raise things. They, just keep their head down, or else they get moved along in different places, and they can't talk about things. So it was important to, I think it's an important voice to have in the conversation. And Helen Joyce, been a journalist for 17 years, had some senior editorial roles at The Economist, author of the book, Trans When Reality Meets Ideology. She was a great person to be able to highlight why you need to be able to speak and name your own reality and engage in these conversations in a society.
I mean, the funny thing is that there's almost no coverage of her tour in New Zealand. I mean, short of Sean Plunkett and Duncan Gardner. I was in Fiji, obviously, so I couldn't get to talk to her, but almost no coverage. I would have thought that something like this, which is a free speech issue, where people are entitled to their views on trans ideology, and I'm a supporter of facts, not fiction, and biological facts at that. Nothing. It's like they're in lockstep. Now, this is a forbidden topic. We can't have anybody hearing dangerous ideas, or ideas that they think are dangerous, because they're just ideas. Shut down completely.
Absolutely. We pitched it everywhere, in all the usual places, but we're not surprised. We haven't quite figured out whether they're actually just not interested in women's rights, which is essentially, and a sex realist view, which is essentially what Helen's espousing, or if they're just not interested in the backlash that they'll get from saying anything that doesn't appear to be the
backlash from about 10 people. I mean, let's face it. Well, there's about 5% of the population are gay, for want of a better term, right? Not heterosexual. And the trans community is a very small percentage of that 5%. There's probably not even 1,000 in the whole country. And yet we've got this disproportionate pressure that's being put on by media organisations, by all sorts of various different lobby. They call themselves lobby groups, but very often they could all meet in a phone box, putting all this awful pressure and laying complaints and causing no end of grief because someone was misgendered or whatever. It's a ridiculous situation that people seem to have forgotten that you can say, well, you're being a dick, go away or shut up.
It does feel like the tail wagging the dog, or at the very least just sort of saying, look, some people believe in biology and reality, and this really does affect women's rights, the rights of women and girls.
It is about women's rights, because let's face it, there's no women wanting to compete in male sports in the Olympics, is there?
Not if they want to even
get close,
make the final, or even qualify. The qualifying times don't match up. Exactly.
It's only men cosplaying as women that want to go into Olympic sports to compete because they were so shit in the male, categories that they wouldn't qualify to go to the Olympics. So they were taking the place of actual women from going to the Olympics to assuage some sort of goal and mental delusion in their head that if they grow their hair long and call themselves Robin, that they can go to the Olympics and take the place of a woman. It's ridiculous.
Well, the Olympic Committee seems to have recently
finally
rediscovered that sex does matter in this way, and the advantage of a male body and being male doesn't just go away because you lower your testosterone or identify as a different as a different sex or a different gender or non-binary. So I think it's really unfair in sports for girls and women. I think that is one of the that is actually one of the edges where a lot of people can see it's patently unfair and it doesn't make any sense, and it is dangerous for women often to be competing against males in a lot of these things.
Especially boxing and things like that.
No, exactly, in the contact sports. But it's also it's not about excluding anyone that wants to think differently, but women should have their own category. Females, you can have mixed, you can have trans categories, you can have open categories. There's 3 or 4 ways you can include people in community sport. Just don't disclude females from one of them. So, I believe in biology. I think it is immutable, and it's a reality, and it's really important for women's rights to be able to name that. That is my own personal view. In the Free Speech Union, people can have any view that they want. We should be able to discuss it, to figure out where are the conflicts in community.
Argue about it.
How can we address it? How can we not? But just the name calling, the shutting down, what happened at Albert Park, that was
appalling.
I was at Albert Park, and that literally was very instrumental in starting my journey here with the Free Speech Union. I thought it was one of the most shameful days in New Zealand's history. The way they treated essentially middle-aged women.
It was men beating up women.
It was frightening. I'm 6 foot, a tall Pacifica woman, and I had to link hands with someone else. I was worried about my safety and to try and get out of that mob. It was absolutely frightening. And to see that celebrated right across the media, I actually just thought it was a shameful day. It absolutely was.
And the police.
And the police abandoning. I expected a robust protest. That's protest rights.
Yeah.
It's part of a robust democracy.
You can stand over there and you can shout as much as you like, but don't assault anybody.
But the absolute mob vengeance, and riled up as they were we could have been going to a botanical gardens. That's literally they were mostly grandmothers who had
my
fought.
partner Kirsty was there, and she was in the front lines, and she said it was frightening.
Yeah.
Absolutely frightening. And, she's a gizzy girl, so knows how to pay it out, and she was frightened.
Yeah. No, I had to get out of there in the end. It was obviously nothing was going to happen, and it was frightening, and I think it was a really shameful day. And the next day, the Free Speech Union had a movie showing at the Academy, and I went along to that because of just like this is ridiculous.
It's out of the gate behaviour, and the police standing back and going, oh well.
So many people calling the police from within Albert Park. It was definitely it was an event that marked me and set me on this journey of I sought out the Free Speech Union, joined their board sort of 6 months later, etc. But it made me really realise that there are issues with our community, there are issues with speech and our inability to do it, and issues with the media. But just on that media, with Helen Joyce touring here, one of her consistent messages, and this is one I think we really need to take on board, is that the mainstream media are less and less relevant. We have a mailing list of 100,000. Podcasts have subscribers and mailing lists in the thousands. RCR Radio has another. The platform has another. These are activated.
I've got a reasonably sized audience too,
These are activated and engaged people who are wanting to hear what you're putting out there and what you're saying. And politicians know that, and they take notice of what's going on outside of that mainstream. So it's not like we're not going to try to get on, but I think we don't
really need them.
We can take that chip off our shoulder.
Yeah.
And there are other avenues, and we're coming into an election year, and the politicians know when you've got an activated and engaged base.
Well, they should know, but they still play the old game. But I blame that mainly on the press secretaries because they're all ex-journalists themselves, so they just go back to the format. But one politician and one party in particular is exploiting podcasts and is exploiting social media, and that's New Zealand First. And Winston Peters, he doesn't speak to the media very often these days. He just puts a post on Twitter, and then it's the news because they read the post and have a look at all the people who are commenting. They create a whole article without actually having to talk to him. But he gets his message across. He did that the other day. Just one word, right? Just one word, we. He posted, it was multiple news articles, is telling off the Prime Minister, saying that, you didn't do this, we did this. And it was subtle, but it was effective.
Yeah, you don't need media releases anymore. You just need one well-crafted quote.
Yeah, one well-crafted quote out on X or Facebook, and then the news media, who are actually lazy, just pick that up, and they've actually got social media reporters, and all they do is sit there all day and looking what's trending. But the one thing they're not looking at is, like, I had Simon Anderson on, was the episode before. That's just clicked over 54,000 views on X. That's more than the people who watch The Nation or whatever else they have on the weekend in the dead zone that qualifies as current affairs from the mainstream media. And that was an hour and a half discussion. And everyone says, oh no, short form. No. Right? If you talk to someone for an hour and a half, they can't hide. And they tell you who they are.
And people are interested in finding out who people are. And also, we're not blank facsimiles or one-dimensional. Everyone's complicated. Everyone has differing views and brings different history, etc. to it. People do want to know, I think, the real person or understand what's going on. That I haven't listened to that one. I saw that up there, so I'll need to take a listen.
Yeah, he's an interesting fellow, but again, he's someone who's just grabbed a camera and went out on the street, and he actually got a lot of publicity for his filming of the Albert Park stuff.
That's where I first came across him, only because nothing in the media but a celebration of love, and I was like, that was not the event that I was at. It was frightening. So well done him.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the media and how they're not free speech advocates, really. They want to speak. I used to call them the media party. They want to be involved in politics, but they haven't got the guts to stand for Parliament. Academics are another crazy group of people that seem to think that they can speak and then no one can speak back at them. And then they have fights amongst themselves if there's somebody who speaks and they don't speak the agreed view, like the group that opposed some of the COVID stuff and wrote about it, and they were ostracised and criticised, which ultimately led to the Academic Freedom Bill, which is now an act.
It passed last night, so yes.
It seems crazy that we have to have a law to protect something that we all thought was there anyway.
Look, I'm probably quite like you. I don't think government does a good job of a whole lot of stuff. It's necessary for some things. So ideally, I wouldn't want to get. Okay, we can have that. We can have that other discussion. I do think it has its uses, but ideally, we wouldn't need to get them involved into universities or the academic space at all. But it seemed like there was a real problem with alternate voices, alternate views being suppressed, being drummed out. The Listener 7, I guess, is also a really great example of that happening. But that also then floating down to students, right? Literally either being told what to think or not being in an environment where they could question anything or feel like they could really explore these ideas or bring, differing points of view. So I think it was a real shame that it got to that point, but I think it needed to. So I think the passing of the bill last night is a good thing for academic freedom.
I think it's a brilliant thing, but again, why did it need a specific law? It should have been a right. It's there anyway. We shouldn't have to define it in law. No,
and we got a lot on the select committee of, and actually we toured Musa Al-Ghabi a few months ago, and what he talked, some of the things he talked about, especially in universities and in the academy, is that if you're in the conformist area in terms of if people like what you say or what you're saying is acceptable, you don't feel like there's any restrictions there. You feel like you can say whatever you want because you're saying kind of what the mainstream believe is okay. It's only when you step out of that. So when people say there's nothing to see here, there is no problem, they're actually probably being completely honest and legitimate of like, I've never been censored. but then you just step out a little bit of someone criticising that, or a slightly heretical thought, or anything else, and then there is no room for it. People are being told what to think, and they are being silenced. So I think the universities are aware of that now, although I'm sure they don't want the enforced academic
Well, I
freedom
don't know.
act.
You look at Susie Wiles, right? She jumped on the COVID bandwagon, and all power to her. She's entitled to do that. She spoke, with academic freedom, and then she got all uppity when she got pushback. And it's like she doesn't understand that free speech means free speech for everybody. And we can discount the horrible things that were said to her. Right? That's just awful people being awful. But she was shutting down debate on anyone who would say, well, hang on a second, but let's have it on facts. But she was a gross hypocrite as well, because she was out there breaching the lockdown regulations. I was the one who released that and posted the video of her sitting at the beach with her friend. And that's probably where a lot of the vitriol came from, that she was exposed as a rank hypocrite.
There seemed to be a lot of it around the world, it seemed, especially from even government departments. I know in the UK, what was it? They were organising Christmas parties while telling everyone to stay inside. You get a lot of fair weather free speech friends in terms of either it's fine as long as I agree with it, or it's fine until someone criticises me on it. But free speech is hard, because it's also defending the speech that you find offensive or you dislike, or that might, offend you or criticise you, and that's the point of free speech.
Just speaking of that, I don't know if you're aware of a tweet by Philip Matthews, where he's talking about reporting. He's a journalist at the press, very vocal on Twitter or on X. And he was defending the article that was written about your conference, a critical article of your conference. And there was a lot of pushback from people on X about that article. I think it was by David Williams, wasn't it? But this is what he said, as soon as I find it. He says, you can't have a free speech event and then complain about how a journalist wrote about it. Like,
arbitrary rules.
Who made up that rule? You can't. He's emphatic. You can't. Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't like it when people call me a can't. Right?
It's not my favourite word either.
Yeah, you can't have a free speech event and then complain about how a journalist wrote about it. You can. Right? That's the journalist's view of the free speech event. It's his view that it was enabling Brian Tamaki. And, I actually quite like Brian. He's a rascal, right? But he says what he thinks. You're never going to die wondering about what Brian Tamaki thinks about anything.
You aren't left wondering. That's absolutely certain. But it is interesting. It's like, yes, you can criticise it, and people can criticise you. It's actually the feature of free speech.
And then you can criticise the criticism, and on it goes, right? And we have a discussion until it's boring.
Yeah.
Or someone mentions Adolf Hitler.
No, exactly. And also, I didn't think David Williams's coverage was particularly good. It's his opinion. He's absolutely entitled to it. But he really conflated Brian Tamaki's views with those of the Free Speech Union, where we put on panels to try and address controversial issues or sort of, bring some debate together. We don't agree with half or even a quarter of what's been said. Or
but you might agree with it.
And maybe
right.
we do, but it is. But it was just that the blanket equation with whatever he says we all agree with, as opposed to it was a panel.
No, we were having a discussion
with an external moderator. It literally is. People don't understand. Sort of that is it's part of free speech, part of trying to have a discussion on a panel, and not everyone agrees. We all don't agree. That's free speech.
That's right. I mean, I don't agree with 100% of what Brian Tamaki says, but you can actually talk to him. You can ring him up you know, hey Brian, you said this the other day, da da da, and you can have a discussion with him, and he'll argue his point, and we'll agree to disagree or whatever. But he's very approachable.
He's not hiding himself, right? You know,
No,
and
he's
you know,
telling us who he is.
exactly. And his criticism of Diwali and sort of other religious sort of customs, you know, half my family celebrates Diwali. I really like it, you know, and I think that the country would be poorer without it. But it's great he can say that, you know, and then I can have a different view and a different conversation with him.
I mean, you know, only when I'm in Fiji do I really celebrate Diwali, but I don't really celebrate it anyway. It's not relevant to me, right? So I don't. The same reason why I don't, you know, celebrate Ramadan. I'm not a Muslim, right? If you want to be a Muslim and celebrate Ramadan, fill your boots, right? But don't make us all want to have to do it. Let us be.
Yes, yeah.
You know, I think back to the Gaddiston flag, you know, the famous "Don't tread on me" flag.
Yep.
That's my ethos. I'm the rattlesnake. Don't tread on me.
Yep.
Right?
But I think that's kind of the one of the reasons why I think free speech is so important is that I really do think it's the operating system for a community and a democracy that actually works. You know, you need to be able to talk to people and disagree and figure out how you can get along. You can't do that if you can't speak to them, if you can't disagree, if you can't engage on controversial.
You can't meet with them, you know.
If you can't meet with them, if you can't even just engage on these topics.
Or if you are discussing things with them, doesn't mean you endorse them. It's like Free Speech Union wasn't endorsing Brian Tamaki's beliefs. They're his beliefs. He's telling us those beliefs. You can disagree with them. You can agree with them.
Yeah.
You can agree with some or disagree with some. That's what free speech gives you. And it seems that the people who oppose that, like clearly Philip Matthews doesn't agree with that. Clearly David Williams doesn't agree with that. Clearly the guy who lives in Los Angeles and focuses on, you know, the Brian Tamaki Church and John Campbell don't agree with Brian Tamaki. But again, they're just presenting their views. They're calling it news, but it's just it's actually opinion.
Yeah.
There's no facts involved in it. You know, when you actually talk to Brian about some of the things that have been raised in, you know, by John Campbell, when you actually hear the real story, you think, oh, well, that's something nothing. You know,
and especially coming in and sitting in this role, listening to people talk about the Free Speech Union, they keep looking for the smoking gun, the shadowy hand.
That's right. I was going to ask you about the Atlas Network.
Well, no, exactly. I clearly haven't been inducted into a high enough level in the Free Speech Union.
Apparently, I'm in the pay of the Atlas Network. I'm yet to see the checks, but
no, exactly. And to be fair, and as I said to David Williams, we have applied for grants, and we did get some grants from Atlas Network and from some other foundations. And in terms of the gang patch ban, we sort of fought against, and hate crime sentencing, etc. But what they're failing to understand is that the majority of our donors are everyday Kiwis, you know, who the majority of our donation is $95 a year from thousands and thousands of Kiwis. People really are aware that their freedom of speech is under peril or is under threat, and they want to do something about it, and they want to give to an organisation that will stand up and do something about it. And you know, we keep the criticism is that we're an AstroTurf organisation, you know, that no one really belongs to. And it's just like, again, you're ignoring what New Zealanders are saying and what they're doing by donating here.
The people throwing those allegations that are usually media or vested interests you've butted up against. Oh, no, of course it's an AstroTurf organisation. Well, how can you say that? Go on. Show me your evidence that says that that's what it is.
Exactly. And when I'm sitting there on the inside, literally watching the bank account, and it's a completely humbling experience, and I feel so responsible in terms of stewarding those donations and making sure that we are effective and that we do allocate our resources in an effective manner to really, you know, forward, you know, the goal of free speech for all Kiwis. So, it's fascinating that once someone has an idea, nothing shakes it, right? That's their narrative, and they really don't want to listen to anything else.
It's like the gang patch bill you raised earlier, you know, a short time ago. It's a difficult situation. Mm-hmm. Patches are used to intimidate people, but I don't subscribe to that view, because well, I'm not intimidated by anybody. Doesn't matter whether they've got tough stickers scribbled on their face or a patch tattooed on their back or just wearing one on a leather vest. I'm not intimidated by it. But I get that other people are intimidated by that. But passing a law like that, kind of like, what do you do next? What if they decide, well, we're only going to wear red bandanas, or we're only going to wear blue sweatshirts, or we're only going to ride white motorbikes? Well, isn't that an identification?
It's definitely the slippery slope argument that we are concerned about in terms of the expression. It is what's next. You know, first it's this. I absolutely understand why they did it, right? And the intimidation of communities and people, that's real. But deal with the illegal activity. Deal with that intimidation. We've got those harassment laws.
Yeah, it's the same arguments in the firearms community. Why did you have to pass a law like that? You should have just policed with the laws that you had. And if you had policed the firearms community with the laws that you had, you wouldn't have ended up with Christchurch, because the police bypassed all policy, all regulation, all laws, and gave the guy his licence. It's their responsibility, not the community's. Yeah. And when he was dobbed in by people in the community, nothing happened. Again, that comes back to the police. We keep coming back to the police and the media.
There is a burning today. I absolutely know that for certain.
Well, they should be torched. You know, I mean, almost you have to burn the place to the ground to burn out the rot and the corruption, because where does it lead?
Cam, are you starting the defund the police movement here?
No, I think we need to have a police service, but we need to have a police service that's trusted. Yep. I'm not sure anyone trusts the police anymore.
Yeah, and neutral and apolitical, and that serves the country and the community, you know, and sort of not individual causes, definitely.
Yeah, it's again another ridiculous situation that could have been avoided, but for some reason, and it has to be systemic within the police, that this has been allowed to rise up. This level of corruption, this level of persecution that goes on, the level of criminal activity. You know, you take the breath tests, 40,000 breath tests, you know, made up, basically. People have been fined off fake breath tests. Well, that's criminal activity.
Yeah, it destroys your trust, unfortunately, in the institution.
So that's when you have quotas. You know, we need to breath test this many people a month. That's where that comes from. When
you misincentivise any scheme, it plays into it, right? You don't get the results that you really want with those misincentives. But it's not an amazing day for the police at the moment, right?
No. Now, you guys have got quite a list of victories, right? Not many people are aware of it because, well, the mainstream media doesn't report on changes in legislation or backing down. Give us a summary of some of your notable victories in recent times.
Yeah, well, in recent times. Well, I'd be remiss literally not to start with the hate speech laws. Yeah. And I know that happened a little while ago, but I think it's to your point that it sort of keeps cropping up in different ways. You know, it crops up again in the Sentencing Acts, and it crops up a little bit again in the Law Commission reports when they're wanting to maybe expand some of the hate crimes area there, which they also shut down. So I think that's one of the most consistent areas that we're on guard against, and we can sort of see what happens overseas, and we see where we don't want to go, you know, sort of down.
So that's where that time delay that I mentioned earlier on, at 3 to 5 years, we get to see what are going to be the trigger points or the pressure points around free speech or any other issue, but free speech in particular for yourself. We've got a heads up on where that's heading. We know what's happening in the United Kingdom. We need to avoid that happening. We're seeing the disaster that's unfolding in Australia in the same way. And then, of course, we look to the United States, which is the bellwether for everybody.
Yes, no, exactly. And the academic freedom, which we sort of talked about as a recent one just last night, again, the UK had passed their own Academic Freedom Act. So we saw it coming from there in terms of speakers shut out of the universities and, you know, the conformity of thought there as well. So I think that's a really good it's a really good indicator of what's coming and how we do need to be aware of it, right, and mobilise before it gets here. A lot of them are also just the wins are in our cases in terms of, the regulatory authorities that are trying to often confidentially punish counsellors or nurses, sort of bring them up for what they've said completely.
Whistleblowers often.
Often whistleblowers or people what they've said completely out of work online as well. So we've still got a lot of cases on the go. We had Portia Mao, with the HDCA win there, sort of a real win for not silencing journalists and for the external interference. But again, with the HDCA, we now think it just needs to go because it's not fit for purpose anymore.
It's being used by bullies to silence people.
It has absolutely been weaponised outside of its original intent. One of the big areas we want to push into is we're seeing a lot of I think more and more of suppression of either names or details that are happening out there, lack of open transparency and reporting in courts, and
Well, there's very often, I don't know if you've been in many court, I mean, you're a lawyer, I don't know what you practiced, but probably not a barrister.
No.
I've sat in quite a few courts, and there's often no journalists at all in any of the courts. There used to be a couple of very studious guys. Edward Gay was one of them from Radio New Zealand, a couple of others. But it's only the big cases. But, and I got 9 convictions of breaching name suppression, right? I ran a campaign in 2010 against name suppression and copped a flogging in the process. It was Judge David Harvey, actually, who convicted me. But I actually respect David Harvey as a judge. I've seen him act in some situations where he's recused himself because of a slight conflict. I think he's was a very integrous judge, and very well thought out about things, and I think he kind of agreed with me that name suppression needed to change, but the law was the law, and so therefore he convicted me. And I only got a $750 fine at the time for 9 convictions of it. But these were utter rat bags. They're almost nobodies, and they had name suppression. But now we've got a situation where there's a lot of very prominent people that have got name suppression and enjoyed the protections of name suppression. The most famous, of course, there's McSkimming. He had it for a long time. Tim Jago from who was the ACT Party president in the past. He hid himself behind name suppression, and now people are using that as a cudgel against David Seymour, saying, why didn't he do anything? Well, the law said he couldn't. You've got another situation of a prominent, they call it a prominent executive or a senior executive with name suppression. Now, I know the details of that case. And the same organisation that challenged the suppression around, or an organisation that's been challenging the suppression around some of these things and trying to overturn the suppression, is now on the other side trying to keep suppression in place. They're absolute bloody hypocrites, and we can't say who they are because then we get in trouble for breaching suppression. But when people find out, they're just going to realise what a bunch of hypocrites they are, and they will find out.
Usually, exactly, the information gets out there in the end. And look, this is actually there's a heated discussion on our council about name suppression. There is a place for it, especially when it's victim led. Or
protecting
family.
Victims.
Exactly, or protecting maybe sort of some of the family of the perpetrator, or if they're in a serious situation.
But nobody cares about the family. No one says anything about the family. It's one of those things that people raise when talking about, oh no, we need to look after their family. You know what? We actually don't.
No. And I think those are extreme examples where it has been granted. So I do think it has its place, but I think that the balance has often been lost. And it's in these prominent ones where actually everyone knows, the media knows, the judges and the lawyers all know. There's another
prominent executive in Auckland. It's another case. I'd never heard of him, right? And if I've never heard of him, then he's nobody, right? He might be the son of a wealthy family, and he is, but no one's heard of that family either. and probably don't know the business or what it does. And then when you look it up, everyone's going, oh, why did he have suppression?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
And I think it is. It's just like the Streisand effect, right? It actually drives more interest than anything warrants. But it really does go against that open justice where the community, part of going through this process, and especially once you've been sentenced, is that the community does find out about it. We know who's in our midst. We know what they've done. We can, and then the community sort of can deal with that as opposed to be shut out of that process. But we've also come across the tribunals or the authorities, the regulatory authorities that are making their own rules
Around suppression, yeah.
Around this is
The
confidential.
Human Rights Tribunal, yeah.
The Human Rights Tribunal. How do you pass a minute that says, not only can these journalists not
they're not
report,
even a court.
They're not even a court.
They're not even a court, and they're not even the tribunal's not even chaired by a judge.
No, but not only can they not sit on the media benches, no one in the public gallery can take notes. That was in an open tribunal of the human rights. That's just it's something from an authoritarian state overseas. It's not something that's happening in our country, but it is happening in our country.
Well, it was really happening in our country under Ardern and Hipkins, right? We had this bizarre situation where we had, something that was called a pandemic, but it really wasn't. And everybody looked to the government to tell them what to do. And they were quite, it was a really salient lesson to me that it doesn't take long to go from a democracy to a totalitarian situation if the right crisis is used, right?
Yes.
And it was used. I mean, the police, again, come back to the police, they broke the law, right? They had legal advice, which they told the Prime Minister and Cabinet they had, that locking down the way that they were proposing was illegal. And they did it anyway. And it was Mike Bush who stood there beside the Prime Minister and said, if you break these lockdown provisions, you'll be spending the weekend at my place, with a big grin on his face. It's very sinister. And we saw a real change in New Zealand society during that time, where freedom was abrogated and tyranny was installed.
Right.
And the vast majority of the population went along with it.
And I think that's the problem. And I think Kiwis are starting to wake up now, just in terms of, what do you mean someone's complaining about me and I can't tell anyone else about this procedure? It's like it's really the process is the punishment. It's not an open process. They don't know what's going on. They can't talk about it often. I think there are fundamental things wrong in how we're dealing with these complaints, because the process is the punishment. They're used to silence people, and then everyone else around them can see that they're getting into trouble for something that they've said, or something that's online, or something that's not, conforms with the general ethos. And then so people self-censor themselves so that they don't get caught up in these regulatory.
It's not just the regulatory arrangements or legislation. People use defamation law to silence people too, and that's happened to me 3 times. I wouldn't be silenced. Ultimately, it cost me a stroke, but I wasn't going to be silenced. I told the truth about those people, and but defamation law is used as a punishment. It's used as a process to drag it out as long as possible, cost you a lot of money, and cause you undue stress. And I think we need in New Zealand some what they call anti-slap legislation, very prominent in the United States, where you can present an argument that this is being used to silence you and the case is dismissed if your merits of your argument win. And I think we need to have an exit ramp from some of these prosecutions that are going on as well, that are around there, that there's an exit ramp or a way out of the situation if certain criteria are met. And that would provide more free speech safeguards as well. But particularly in this case with this awful persecution of this woman, using laws, not what they were intended, but as a method of silence and torture.
Yep. Weaponisation, and Portia Mao, who actually won
Same
against
thing,
the
too.
HDCA, she's now in defamation charges on very similar circumstances in terms of the stress, the expense, the time. We're writing about her actually just this weekend, and it's exactly that. It's weaponisation of a different type of law now that they can't use the HDCA as well against her. They're turning to other methods.
Yeah, so now it's a civil case with defamation. We'll tie you up for 3 or 5 years. You need to shut up. That's what they're saying to her.
Yeah, they're sending a very clear message, especially that they don't want Chinese journalists in the New Zealand community to speak out. That's very clear, and so we will be writing about that this weekend. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think we just need to bring this more to light, and otherwise, it is about freedom of speech, people's ability to criticise, people's ability to engage in thought outside of
just because you've got hurt feelings doesn't mean that you can, use laws to silence people. And that's what it really comes down to. It's actually hurty feelings we're talking about, or hurty words,
Yep, and then also after sort of both Graham Linehan and Charlie Kirk, the events that happened, we have seen freedom of speech appearing more on, let's say if it was the left side, if you're doing the right and the left there, where they are starting to realise that it is an important right. So I'm hoping that recognition of why it's important for everyone to have freedom of speech is slowly seeping into the consciousness of more people.
So I'm a bit Machiavellian, and when the Green Party was promoting the hate speech legislation, I said, yeah, let's embrace this. Yeah, let's bring it in. We'll bring it in because they think that they're immune to it. And then they'll find out that when the government changes or you get a judge that's looking at this and thinking, well, actually, you can use that law against them. And I always say to politicians, be careful what you wish for.
Yep.
Right?
The devil's in the details always with these things. Would you want someone else deciding what you can say and what you can't say when the government changes or when someone else is in power? And as a litmus test, that's a pretty good one to be. Nope.
See, the funny thing is that the left in general, and most of New Zealand's governments have been left-wing, really. Muldoon was a socialist. Everyone said he was right-wing, but he wasn't.
Think big.
Think all the Greens that are going on about, driving electric cars and that, they're all being powered by Think Big. Mm-hmm. The power stations and everything that was built, they can all thank Rob Muldoon for that. The damn, we opposed it at the time, but it's hilarious now. Excuse me. The people who used to be big advocates for free speech, who marched in the street against apartheid, that did all of these things that were basically free speech, freedom of association type arrangements, are all the people that are now opposed to it.
The most fascinating and sort of confusing thing is I was at university when the Bill of Rights passed, and as you say, the anti-war, civil rights, stop the tour, all of that came from free speech, really sort of hard, more left, ideals, etc. And when it was passed through, definitely sort of a celebration on that side of this is such an important right, it's fundamental, we need to protect it, etc. And then literally 20 years later, it's like I looked away and I looked back and there's no trace of it left, no trace of it.
We saw that in COVID, right? Where was the Bill of Rights Act during COVID? Where was the Human Rights Commission when the government was playing fast and loose with the law? Where were they? They said not a word, not a mutter, not a murmur. They turned the Health Act inside out and upside down and said they can use it to lock the entire population up when the act is written to lock up those people who are sick. Right?
Yep.
And nothing was said. And that's, Geoffrey Palmer every day blurted out something over the weekend. He was the architect behind the Bill of Rights Act. But the one thing he didn't do is make that the supreme law of New Zealand, that every other act of Parliament has to refer to the Bill of Rights Act. It's the minister goes, look, this breaches this particular part of the Bill of Rights Act, but we're okay with that. And then they pass the law anyway.
It's unfortunately, I would have to agree with you. I think having it as supreme law, a law that can't just be ignored, would be more ideal to really embed those rights in them. And I agree. It is subject to reasonable limitations, and I'm not sure that standard of proportional.
Well, we've seen judges just ride over that.
Yeah.
With people who are prosecuted for, breaching lockdowns or not wanting to take a medication and being forced out of a job, they'd go there, go with the Bill of Rights case, and the judges would go, oh, no, it was reasonable to do that. Okay, sweet. Yeah. All right, so you don't think the Bill of Rights Act is that important then?
Yeah.
And if the judges don't think it's important, then what have we got? Why have we got the Act in the first place? Yeah. What's the point of it?
Yeah, that it's not doing its job, which again also brings back to the COVID inquiry, which is why, as a country, we needed that open inquiry where people turn up, are asked questions,
say what they think.
Say what they think. I mean, no one's ever perfect, right? We all make decisions on the best information that we had, but us as a country, I really think we needed that inquiry for people to be able to speak, to be able to express their anger and frustration, and everything.
It was outrageous what was done to society, to children's education, for a whole lot of things. And now the evidence is becoming more and more apparent that we were lied to, we were gaslit, we had all of these happening. That should not have been able to occur if we had a functioning media. And again, it comes back to the media, and it comes back to the organisations who had an opportunity to say to ministers, no, you can't do that. That's illegal. No, you can't do that. The police went, oh, well, we'll do it. We'll comply. Right? And people don't understand, and I guess you have to have experienced a totalitarian regime to understand that whilst you might vote in a socialist government, you kind of almost have to shoot your way out of it.
Yeah. And I was literally from Kuwait before I arrived back into New Zealand in COVID. We were under 22-hour lockdowns, for at least a month, and you had to have a permit to go once a week to the supermarket. It was, very, very intense time over there that did go on for months under extreme curfews. Sort of to arrive back, and I would have thought, much to your point of how we can see the trends coming from overseas, I would have thought because we were a little bit behind in some of the COVID waves that were coming, we could have used different methods and information and science to have a better response.
One of the most appalling things that our government did during COVID was ban the use of ivermectin. And everyone goes, oh, it's horse dewormer or it's whatever. In most rest homes, they have ivermectin on the shelf because that's how you get rid of scabies attacks within places like rest homes and residential places where there's lots of people around. That's how they get rid of it. It's a very effective, low-cost medication. But the reason why they got rid of it is because if you want to use emergency use authorities for medications, new medications like the vaccine, there has to be no alternative treatment to it. So if you remove ivermectin from the schedule, now there's no alternative treatment for COVID. It's the same reason why Ardern wanted to ban tobacco and cigarettes. Not many people know that. She wanted to ban the use of tobacco, and anything that had nicotine in it, including cigars and pipes and all that, because it was required by the emergency use authority to not have an alternative. Very few people who smoke, like I smoke cigars and occasional pipe, very few people who smoke got COVID because the nicotine the nicotine kills it, and it all, especially all around the throat and where it gathers. So all my mates who smoke cigars in the cigar club and stuff, none of us got COVID.
I have not heard about that. That's fascinating.
Right? So they tried to ban it. The only reason they didn't ban it is because Winston Peters was still in cabinet at that point, and he's a inveterate smoker, never stops, and he said, no way, we're not going to do that. So all the people out there who smoke cigarettes and smoke cigars, none of us got COVID. We didn't get vaccinated either. That's that's why I call cigars freedom sticks.
There you go.
Right.
There you go. I learn something every day, and I never knew that. But, again, at least having more open discussions about it, right? Having, as you say, a media pushback. One of the most shameful things I sort of witnessed was literally in my daughter's intermediate sports team. Some kids couldn't play sports in the first term of the school. And I didn't realise until they joined in the second term when the mandate got dropped. And I was like, these poor kids, because all of the kids were running around on court. Like, there was no distancing, and it doesn't stop
But it got ridiculous even at sports clubs. I'm a clay target shooter. And when you're shooting clay targets, the closest you are to another competitor is about 2 metres, right? But they made us all wear masks outside while we're shooting clay targets. It was ridiculous. Like, you could go into the club room to buy ammunition, but you couldn't go into the club room to buy chips and a Coke. That's how ridiculous it was, that people were making stuff up on the fly, but mainly because the officials were making stuff up on the fly.
Yeah.
And no media ever said, well, hang on a minute. It's like the rule that you could go to a restaurant, but you had to wear your mask if you were standing up, but when you sat down, you didn't. Right, because the virus just floats around above head level.
The internal contradictions on a lot of those, especially with the kids in the sports, was just, there was no distancing or anything sort of happening when these kids got together.
But we've seen that carry on now. We've got the measles bullshit going on. Oh, everyone get your vaccine. Well, most of us, our age, we got vaccinated against measles when we were at school. Right.
Yeah.
So why are they pushing vaccinations for people who have already been vaccinated against? Did the vaccines not work? Were we hoodwinked? It makes you start questioning about, well, what's the agenda here? But you can only question if you've got a free media and free speech.
And I think the questions are far better out in the open, right? So at least, why is this happening? What are we doing? And then the information can come back, and there can be a robust discussion.
Take us along with you. Don't tell us what to do.
I think it is that take us along with you. I have had a measles booster when I got my tetanus booster and everything else before I moved to Kuwait, and it was, there was a long list of things that they recommended. That
I worked a lot in Asia, right? I've had every vaccination you can imagine, right? And people say, oh, you're anti-vax, Cam. I said, no, I'm not anti-vax. I've had every vaccination known to man, but I wasn't having that one. I made a choice. I'm not having that one. And you were decried for that. You were bullied. You were abused. You were, given names. Oh, you're a cooker.
I think it's back to the discussion we started at the beginning. It was the othering of people, right? That sort of polarisation, as opposed to really trying to understand, look, some people are making these decisions based on a whole range of different either information or personal circumstances, versus just calling them names, demonising people, locking them out of.
Yeah, give me actual reasons. Give me evidence, whatever.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the media have been involved in this for a long, long time. If you go back to my case with Dirty Politics, Nicky Hager wrote a book and the media attacked me. Well, he wrote a book. That's his opinion. Was it true? They go, oh, well, he's never been sued. Well, suing people costs money. He can have his opinion and I can have mine. But he didn't want me to have an opinion. He didn't want me to have influence, so he tried to shut me down, and the media went along with it. And when you go back and look at those things, you look at, when Willie and JT were attacked, and then they were kicked out of their job. Peter Williams was kicked out of his job because he didn't want to go along with the party line. And people will get othered, they get cancelled, they get all of this. It's appalling. and the media go along with it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they're actually part of the problem.
And I think we're more than halfway to a solution, to a good solution on this, right? In terms of the alternate media or talking directly to people.
We have to be vigilant and stay on it. It's not we won that. It's we won it this time.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like free speech. You can't take your eye off the ball.
No.
We really need to keep emphasising to people why it's important that they're able to speak, that their opinion is important in this conversation.
See, I always point people to, this is probably a good final point, I guess. I always point people to the US Constitution. Mm-hmm. Right? The First Amendment is the right to free speech. Right? Mm-hmm. And the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. Mm-hmm. And the reason why the Second Amendment exists is to protect the first one. And you've lived in the United States.
No, absolutely. I would absolutely agree. If you, free speech is so important. If you don't have free speech, then you aren't able to trust your government, because you can't criticise your government, because you can't criticise.
And if you've got a totalitarian government that says that you can't criticise them, which is, you look at the history of 1776 and all that happened around there, the reason why the US Constitution was written by those eminent people, and I've got to point out, the average age of them was 24, right? 24-year-olds wrote the US Constitution.
It was a different time back then.
Different time back then. But it's almost a perfect document. You know, it's got, there's people who criticise it, and they're entitled to criticise it because of Article 1, the right to free speech. And that's why nothing gets done about it, because it's actually a very good document. They had a totalitarian government in the form of the British royalty, and a very coercive colonial force that was there. And so they wanted to overthrow it. And to do that, you need to have free speech. And the second thing, to overthrow a government, totalitarian government, is you need to be able to fight for it.
Yep.
And that's what it's there for. And it's a shame that we haven't got a similar constitution. We have an unwritten constitution, which is a collection of laws which was actually meaningless as soon as you get in front of a judge.
Yes. Maybe we need to have a push for a Supreme Constitution in New Zealand.
The only scary thing about that is who gets to write it.
In this day and age.
So
true.
people say, oh, we should be a republic. Yeah, but Helen Clark's still alive. She'd be nominated by the left as the first president. You could mark my words. Do you want Helen Clark to be the first president of New Zealand? Do you want Jacinda Ardern to be the first president of New Zealand? Jim Bolger's passed away now, and he was a Republican. So it's a matter of who gets to write it, right? And do you trust the people that are writing it, that they'll get it right? Because if you look at the laws that are made now,
just like with free speech, who gets to censor, who gets to decide, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a job that I'm willing to give to,
anybody. No, we all need to agree, and we need to agree to disagree sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way forward.
Yeah. And that's a perfect point in which we can finish episode 20. Thank you so much for coming on to the Good Oil podcast, Jillaine Heather.
Perfect. Thank you, Cam.
Hey, now welcome to the show, where the wind's blowing strong and the truth can flow. This is the Good Oil. Catch a vibe today with Cam Slater leading us all the way.